All right. Thank you, Saul, for being my guest here. You're the only guest right now. We're speaking to each other like someone else is here because, in reality, there's multiple people when you are by yourself, except they converge into one personality. And that's what we identify as the main character of our story, that is our life. And that's the subject I wanted to get into today. It's the story of our life, and the main character being us, the ego. And that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, like someone who has an inflated ego, or on the other end of it, someone who's completely selfless, that isn't controlled by their ego. And the ego is very much tied with the image of ourselves and how we are viewed by others. I've taken a lot of notes on the subject because it interests me personally, since it's always been something that I've had to keep in check with humility, because if I don't, it would make me seem like an asshole. So I always stay humble because I don't want to project something that I'm not, specifically a narcissistic person full of themselves. And it's not because I don't want people to view me as that or to hide it, because it's not who I am. It's always been humility that has kept me grounded and genuine to being me. Life has been me trying not to let the ego take control, because you know the type of self-consumed beast that you can become, and it's pretty much the subject here that I wanted to talk about, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there experiencing this similar thing, since the ego is all we've really known in our life. But it's also a very unknown subject, because while it's who we are and it's in our face day to day, it's also out of our point of view in the back office. We wouldn't really know what the ego is or be self-aware about it if it weren't for the tools of language and communication, to be honest. So the ego is one of those things that we know with a word, but we don't know or understand it within our minds, what it really means and what it really is. And it goes to show, because I see a lot of people out there whose ego takes big control of their life and their behaviors, and they're just strapped on for the ride like a roller coaster, only for it to end when they die. And it's a very unfortunate life and a sad life, full of suffering, when the ego is the one at the wheel. So that's why it's been a subject of interest of mine, because I've felt that liberation when the ego steps out of the steering wheel and your very own conscious awareness comes in, and it validates what you really want to do and not what you think you want to do or what you think would make you look the best or provide you the most success. And success is a very vague term, specifically when we're talking about evolutionary success, which the ego is tied to that. So I'll be going somewhere with this, but the ego is kind of evolution's tool for success. Every animal and life form has its own ego, and it knows things are going to happen to it, and it knows it's going to interact with other conscious beings. So life had to create this self-preserving mechanism to increase the chances that we obtain that vague success in life. And that is our ego, which is that mechanism. And the ultimate success for our ego is that our genes are replicated out there by procreating, pretty much making babies. That's the main goal for the ego, and that's why we eat, that's why we fear for our lives, and we do all these things and jump through all these hoops just so life can procreate and pass on. And that's the root influence for the ego. It's procreation and making sure there's evolutionary success in that. And it's why we're so attached with self-image, and also with what our abilities are, what we're capable of doing and what we're not. And the ego, when it realizes it's incapable of doing certain things, it becomes a very harsh critic in our inner voice. And it's because the ego is trying to push you in a way that animals have been influenced most successfully by. It's with harsh behaviors, with pain and pleasure. That's why we have the reward system in our brain, because that's how the reptilian brain reacts and gets things done. Otherwise, we'd just be basking around, hanging out. So, the ego is very much a part of our survival, and it's built into our mental operating system, but it's a system that's pretty obsolete for our current times. It works well with reptiles and insects and all the other animals in the lower tiers of consciousness, but for us humans, we happen to be in a weird position that the ego no longer serves us anymore, and on the contrary, it actually hinders us. For people that are really tied to their egos come some very severe consequences, as I mentioned before, such as constant suffering. So that is why it's very important to know the key questions to ask so that we can debunk this ego, such as, why do I think what I think? Why do I desire the things I desire? Why do I do the things I do and behave the way I do? And it's asking those questions that we realize that the root causes are tied to appeasing the ego and attaining pleasure and trying to cover up our vulnerabilities and insecurities, because the ego thinks the world doesn't want to see those things, because if those things are exposed, you might not be accepted by those around you. And maybe that would have been the case back then in a survival situation, but I feel that the tables have definitely turned and people are much more receptive to vulnerabilities, and when they see people expressing those things, it brings us closer together, realizing that we don't have to be this perfect individual. We can be imperfect, and within the imperfection, there's perfection. Okay, well, let me hear your thoughts. What do you guys think about the ego? Any experiences you might have with it? How do you grapple with your ego? Is your ego a nice person? Is it a bad person? Mine personally is always in the verge of both. That's why I gotta keep it on check. But yeah, hit me up. Let me know what you gotta say. Let me know what you want to know. Let's keep this conversation going so we could be a better person tomorrow and a much better community in the future. Thank you, and catch you on the flip side.